Chapter 331, Dungeon Curator. Victor POV. Lakeshore. Do it. Victor sent the message and sighed. It was now or never. The crystal mine was at an all-time low in the number of defenders, and Victor didn't think another chance would come like this. They were supposedly having a grand festival, and many were miles away, drinking into the night. Too bad they never thought they would be attacked. Too arrogant or too blind, it didn't matter which. Victor would take advantage of the chance. Plus, by all reports, the man still hadn't evolved, unlike Victor. The boost of rank wouldn't end the fight outright, but it would give him an edge. The evolution bonus, along with the few levels he'd gained since, had netted him a generous amount of stat points. Not to mention the skill that came with his new class. Bold of you to do it on the eve of winter, Maeve teased. It gives the barbarian strength from what I've heard. Victor scoffed. Winter or no winter, it matters little. We've reinforced the walls, made preparations, and are ready for anything he could throw at us. If he marches on us, he'll learn that fire always beats ice. A dark flame materialized and danced around his fingers to illustrate his point. The intense flames he could conjure were a major factor in his decision. Especially the special flame he kept sealed away. While he hadn't been confident in beating the man when he first began planning, it was different now. He'd spent months preparing against a specific foe while they had spent it relaxing. For your sake, I hope it's enough, Maeve whispered. I'll be gone for a few days, but rest assured, I'll be back for the show. Off to go tell her master. You're so confident there'll be a show? Victor asked. They were only planning to hit the mine and take what was there. In the grand scale of things, it wasn't that high of a provocation. Maeve smiled sinisterly. Oh yes, there will be a show. I'm certain of that much. When he said one warning, I believe he meant it. Victor brushed it off and focused on something else. If you're off to see him, I have things for you to take. It physically pained him, but Victor had to give them up. It was nearly all of his wealth, but if things worked out, he'd come out the other side with more than he could ask for. It would be worth it more than twice over. A hefty sack of coins clattered as he set them down, and they didn't have the dull sound of copper on copper. It was a bag full of silver. There were also a few other valuable gems and trinkets he'd gotten from the dungeon. Maeve tested the bag's weight and peered inside. And what, pray tell, are you asking for in return? He won't send forces up here to aid you. Your city isn't worth the exposure. Victor knew that already. He wasn't going to get any help in the manpower department, but that didn't mean material help was out of the question. Ink, Victor stated. Demon blood ink. I'm out of it, and I cannot make new contracts without it. It was the main ingredient stopping his army from growing. There was no way he was going to trust anyone without an ironclad agreement, and what better way than to seal it with demonic blood itself. Whoever found out the unique properties of the blood is either the ultimate sadist or a genius. How else would you figure out that contracts signed in demon blood had such effects? Probably both, if Victor was honest, but he didn't like to think too deeply on the matter. It didn't much concern him, and he'd learned even before sometimes it was best not to ask questions. Did he feel bad that he was effectively chaining men and women in the same curse that held him? No, he didn't. That was life. To reach higher, sometimes stepping on others was a requirement. It shall be done. Maeve took the bag. You know the price you'll have to pay, and I don't mean this. She waved the coins. I know. The summoning will take place after I get what I'm due, Victor said sharply. Consorting with demons weren't something he took pride in, but it was what needed to be done. As much as he didn't care for it, his conscience wouldn't stop him from doing it. What was one summoning on a planet of billions? He'd already done it a few times, and the world hadn't ended yet. I know you will. Maeve left the rest unsaid. His own contract would demand it of him, and there was no hope in fighting it. Victor had already tried many times. His deal with the devil finished. Maeve vanished in a theatrical puff of shadow, and Victor was left alone. Let's hope things go smoothly. The team he sent was the best he had, and they had trained for operations such as the one they were on. We shall see. Chris POV. Frostheim. My hammer crashed into the earth with a resounding thud. The top layer of soil exploded outward, but the impact was otherwise tame. Comparatively, I hadn't used any skills nor were any boosts active, but my full strength was still something to be proud of. 4.46 meters of deformation. Depth of 2.98 meters. Lucille read off the measurements as she scrambled to take them. Time wasn't a factor, but the woman was insistent that they needed to be done right away. "And how does this help in curating the dungeon?" I asked. My grand hopes of Gabriel becoming a curator had been dashed. He loved enchanting too much to give it up and refused to swap his profession. No one else in the family cared to take it up in his stead, leaving me in a right pickle. Luckily, Elliot pointed out the crazed woman now in front of me as the solution to our problems. "It helps everything," Lucille exclaimed, still inside the small crater I had made. "We need to record and track the changes of the ever-increasing mana density and its effects on the environment." That wasn't at all a direct answer to my question, but I nodded along. Lucille had a sort of mad scientist vibe when she got excited about things. One that was better to nod and go along with than to fight. "We've been doing this testing for weeks, and the area and depth of the deformation have consistently and uniformly decreased," the woman said. "This proves my theory that the planet is becoming increasingly resistant to change." "That's hardly true," I said. "The construction teams still work at the same pace. They dig the same amount in the same time frame." "No, not that kind of change. I mean sudden and intense change of high amplitudes," Lucille explained. "It used to be that your very steps used to break the ground when you accelerated at full power. Now nothing of the sort happens. You can push off without breaking the ground under you." That was true. It honestly wasn't something I put much thought towards. The last time I caused such damage to the terrain was back in the tutorial. Ever since our return, things had been somewhat contained unless I pulled out the big skills and had fought a while. But like Lucille said, my effect on the terrain was diminishing. "My strength is the same," I stated. "My hammer is the same. My swing is the same." "Right," she interrupted with a downright scary smile. "All else is constant, so only one thing makes sense. I'm still not sure of the specifics on the how, but I can now confidently claim that it is happening, whether we record it or not. An increased inertia that only kicks in with a sudden force? A metaphysical effect because of mana? That makes more sense since this change is related to increased ambient mana density." She mumbled aloud. "Do you think the planet grades mean more than purely mana density?" I asked. "If they function anything like ranks, there will be unseen effects from one grade to the next." Evolving to the next rank didn't explicitly state all that had changed in notifications or on a status screen. The only thing we got from the system was a notification that we had evolved, and an associated stat boost for doing so, nothing else. But that didn't describe all that happened. There was a complete overhaul of the entire body and mana system that was difficult to put into words. Going from F rank to E rank felt like night and day, even though my stats hadn't changed by much. A subtle strength and increased endurance and toughness. Mana flowed smoother and reacted faster. If what happened to our bodies happened to planetary bodies, the changes started to make sense. "An increase in grade," Lucille whispered and stared off. "It fits. All readings say our planet is still degrade, but we know it's still increasing. This could be a side effect of that grade change." I slammed my hammer down a few more times to get a better feel for the change. The diminished effect from my blows wasn't something I had cared to look into, but now that it was pointed out, I noticed the difference. "It's as if the ground itself is firmer," I muttered. "No, like reality is firmer, if that makes any sense." It was like the freezing temperature of water all over again. Various mana levels played jump rope with what used to be firm laws of physics. A strengthening of reality itself? I'll need to run so many tests. The woman had caught my mutterings. This wasn't even close to why I came to her, and I had to shake away from continuing down that road. "Lucille, I came here to ask about the dungeons." I steered us back. "How are they? Their growth statistics? How fast can you estimate another floor to appear?" "Ah, yes, sorry about that. It's so easy to get carried away. Abigail's evolution came with a few nifty changes. Her ties to the pylon, being the one who ran the entire city, made her evolution uniquely beneficial to it. Like the increased shop range for Jonathan, but in a more overarching way. One such change being Lucille's appointment. A new slot had opened up to formally claim dungeons through the city pylon and monitor them through the faction dungeon curator position. We could now, with a look at the pylon interface, tell how many floors both our claimed dungeons had and how close they were to breaking. Not that they were ever close. The finer details, like monster count, mana level, and current progress towards the next floor, were all something Lucille could see, and it was nice to be updated on those things. Abigail had made it a weekly report. The metal dungeon is a few days away from the 13th floor. The other one is still a few weeks behind, but it should reach that level before spring comes at the latest if we continue feeding it the same amount of mana crystals. Lucille described. Any idea of the monsters the new floor will hold? Other than their level being 120 to 130. No. I won't know the type, affinity, or species until the floor is finished. I knew it was unlikely, but I had to ask anyway. It would temper my expectations when I got down there to run it. What was it you put in the last report? I asked. There was something about a new skill you were hoping to acquire. Lucille brightened up and smiled. Oh, that. You won't believe the sheer breadth of what's available to the curator profession. At first, I thought I would only be able to monitor and subtly influence the dungeon's growth, but my profession can do so much more than that. I still can't design dungeon floors directly, but I just know I'll be able to eventually. Yes, but I'm more interested in these gates you talked about, I said. Oh, dungeon floor gates. It allows me to create a gate on every floor so that you don't have to walk through the entire dungeon anymore. That way, say if you want to reach the 10th floor, all you have to do is walk through the gate and bam, you're there. No more trudging through all 9 floors just to reach the 10th. Yes, that. I said, is that something you can do? Lucille sighed wistfully. Not yet, sadly. The fancy elf gave me a book about it. He made me pay 25 silver for it, but it was well worth it. All the excitement that built at her explanation drained from me. I had thought it was a skill she had already picked up, not one she was looking forward to picking up. Being capped as I was, I hadn't run the dungeons in a while, but that didn't mean I would never go back to them. The opportunity to skip all the useless upper floors would save so much time. Anything less than level 50 gave practically nothing in terms of essence. It wasn't worth the time to kill them. At that moment, I felt a disturbance. Aura detection was almost always active, and through it I felt someone running toward me. That in itself wasn't the issue. It was who was rushing toward me. Ashley, our resident healer, was running at me with what appeared to be her full speed. A running doctor was never a good sign. Chapter 332. Not even settled. Chris POV. Frostheim. I separated from Lucille and walked to meet Ashley away from our testing area. I wasn't sure why our healer was running at me, and just in case it was something sensitive, I stepped aside. Ashley easily closed the distance and was in front of me swiftly, and her face made it clear she wasn't bringing good news. Bad news and a running doctor. Chris. She was distraught and to the point of nearly hyperventilating. The third bad sign. I did everything. No, I couldn't dash. I'm sorry. The woman was usually unflappable, even in the face of a battlefield hospital. She was like a steel wall processing the injured during the test. Not even the mountain of dismembered warriors or corpses had rattled her this much. This must be personal. Take a breath and explain clearly. My words were forceful as the longer she took to explain, the more worried I became. It's Grandma. She got out. Something's wrong and I can't fix it. She collapsed in the garden dash. That was all she had to say. I was off sooner than the words were out of her mouth. Ashley was quickly behind me as we both sprinted back to the city. The testing grounds were in between the dungeon and the city, only a few minutes away, but even that felt like hours. I disproved Lucille's observation as I left small indents in the ground. My full strength being utilized to get home as quickly as possible. Ashley was close behind me, but didn't have the speed to keep up. Her agility was even lower than mine, not to mention her strength. There was a dedicated hospital wing of the castle, and that was my target. It had only been used as a recovery station before, with me as its most frequent visitor. Now it held someone else. The guardsmen at the gates saw me coming and worked frantically to open the gates in time. I wasn't sure if I would have waited if they failed. Replacing them was a paltry worry compared to the alternative. The guards at the inner gate had more warning and had them open with time to spare. My aura cleared the streets, and I quickly made it through the city. I busted through the castle doors and climbed the steps in giant leaps. The stone held, but barely. They would need to be upgraded soon. Only when I nearly tore the door of the medical ward from its hinges did I finally still. My entire family was here. Everyone who was in the city now stood around a hospital bed. Uncle Braden and Aunt Carrie were the closest, as it was their mother who occupied the bed. Around them were the grandchildren: Abigail, Gabriel, Vincent, Mitchell, Hal, and Connor. Around them was the next generation, the great-grandchildren, of whom there were 3, Lily, Anna, and Josh. The rest of the family, the in-laws not directly related to her, stood nearer to the edges of the room, Sam being the sole exception, as she used a few healing skills near the bed. Rachel stood behind Braden, rubbing his back, while Lucy did the same for Vincent. My mother was behind Abigail and Gabriel, and only smiled softly as I arrived. Jonathan was making sure the 3 kids didn't climb on the bed. The only people missing were Austin and Ashley, with the latter quickly walking around me and through the door a few moments after I did. Explain. It was Sam who did so, not Ashley. We aren't sure why, but she just collapsed. One second she was fine, and the next is presenting like a myocardial infarction. But that doesn't make any sense. I haven't seen anyone have a heart attack in years. She had a heart attack? I asked. No, Sam answered. It presents like a heart attack, but the symptoms are lingering, and her heart is fine. Body scan picks up nothing wrong. No clots, no blockage, nothing seems wrong. Nothing we do helps. None of mine or Ashley's skills do anything. Even Abigail's doesn't help. Nothing is working, and we don't know why. What do you mean you can't fix it? Both of you have put me back together from scraps before. I looked at both healers intently. I firmly remembered the conditions they had pulled me out of. Both healers just shook their heads sadly. Potions? Connor took this one. Ineffective. Even rare health potions do nothing. It's like there is nothing there to heal. The medicinal energies just spread and do nothing. I wasn't sure how to respond. What did a person say to that? Chris. Jonathan pulled my attention. Feel her spirit. What is he on about? Her spirit felt. Weak wasn't enough to describe it. It was closer to flickering. Even when Jonathan's spirit tore, it had never felt this weak. The man had felt diminished, sure, but not this. It was at this point that the woman in question spoke up for herself. My abrasive entrance and subsequent demanding of information had put everyone on the figurative back foot. It didn't help that I hadn't bothered to rein in my flaring aura, which made people wary. Even my family, who had grown comfortable with the feeling over the years, hesitated when faced with the full brunt of it. I'm old, Christopher. Even her voice was weak. I never expected to see so many years, but age comes for us all eventually. It took me a second to calculate her age and realize she was close to 90. There was too much going on to celebrate them yearly, and we only made exceptions for the 3 children. Everyone older, not so much. It had been almost 4 years since the change. My first thought was stats. Vitality had done a lot to rewind the clock. But looking at her now, all of those rewound years were showing and more. She looked old, older than she should be. Stats stave off aging better than they reverse it, Abigail explained, treating the teaching opportunity as an outlet. Gaining vitality while young has a much better effect than when gained later. Even so, it should have done more than it did. I was set to live for over 200 years. That was double the age of my grandma, and before evolving. She's only level 25. G-rank lifespan is only 100 years. And that's with leveling from a young age, not starting in your 80s. Cold, freezing cold water shocked my system. I had known she had stagnated at level 25. She hadn't gained a law nor done anything else required to evolve. She hadn't wanted to. I knew what would result from that. I knew what would happen. I just hadn't thought it would be so soon. I thought there would be more time to help her or convince her. Everyone tried to get her to evolve, to do something that would get her a few levels, but she firmly refused everything. She planned it that way. The thought felt like poison, but I couldn't disregard it immediately. Of all the reasons, that one was the only one that made any sense. I wasn't the only one to reach it, either. You knew, Hal said, barely a whisper. You never planned to evolve. The old woman nodded slowly. No, I didn't. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but I just don't have it in me. Before any of us could interrupt, she waved us off, showing more vigor than I had expected to see when her spirit was not. I watched my husband of over 60 years get taken from me. I watched 2 of my sons die. I watched too many grandchildren leave the world before they should have. I've buried too many people before me who should have been buried after me. Even when I thought it was over, 2 more were taken. I just don't have it in me any longer. I held on for as long as I could. I made sure that you all were safe and our family would continue. Some of you are now D-rank, which was just a dream back then. Now that I'm confident, I can face Richard proud. That was all he ever wanted. To see his family live on, and I can tell him you have and will. Everyone was stunned into silence. No one knew what to say. Carrie just held her mother's hand with tears, while Braden stood like a silent sentinel on the other side. I stood in the doorway like an idiot. You'll have to apologize to Austin for me. Her words were weaker now, all that previous vigor gone in a flash. I don't think I can wait for him. No, we can buy something. The store has to have something. If not, those merchants, Carrie said. Grandma just looked sad. It's time, Caroline. I want to see my family again. I know they're waiting for me, the same way I'll be waiting for you. I stood in the doorway for hours, my feet planted in the stone like I was made of it. Ashley and Sam tried again, but their skills had no effect. Neither did Abigail's. It was her spirit, and their skills couldn't reach it. It was slowly being snuffed out. The flame flickered more and more until it didn't. She died later that night. The messages we frantically sent to Austin never made it in time. He learned the next day. His trip was forgotten, and he was rushing home with all haste. My body ran on autopilot. It saw a body no longer living and knew what to do. Ice froze, and it would protect the body until we were ready to bury it. A daze filled me. It was so unexpected. I felt so blindsided. I was trying my best to advance my craft, and the next thing I knew, bam. It was easier than the others, as bad as that sounded. The knowledge that this was what she wanted helped cut the bite that usually came with loss. It helped, but it still hurt. Austin wasn't going to make it in time for the funeral. We all felt bad for having it without him, but we also couldn't delay for months until he arrived. It was held the following day. On a frigid winter day, we held the service. The gathering was small, as it was only open to family. We buried her in the open spot next to Granddad, and we mourned her passing. Drinks were shared and stories were told. From sunup to sundown, we all grieved in our own way. My choice was with alcohol, as I was trying to cut my habit of killing things when my emotions were in disarray. The habit of going out and hitting things was something I was trying to curb. So, it was with a moderate bordering significant buzz that another person came running at me. A messenger who looked every bit the haggard mess one would expect from running miles and miles. From the look of it, he came running all the way from the mine and stopped for nothing, not even sleep. The biggest thing, the piece that drew my immediate attention, was that he was bloody, and the wounds didn't come from beasts. They were cuts like those from a blade. "Sir," he huffed, drawing straight to catch his breath. "My lord." He was so flustered he forgot not to call me that. "The mine! It's under attack." My urge to hit things reached new heights. The dirt hadn't even settled on her grave, and now someone was going to die. Chapter 333, 4. Muster for War. Chris POV. Frostheim. The urge to do many things hit me all at the same time as the messenger relayed what he knew. A large force suddenly attacked the mine under the cover of night. The guards and miners fought back, but they were slaughtered. Fleeing miners were chased into the woods as they escaped. Only a few made it out, and the one in front of me had run with everything he had to make it back here as quickly as possible. Every further detail I learned made my face turn harder and harder. I wanted to run off toward the mine. I wanted to hit something. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rush to Lakeshore, and I wanted to feel my hammer hit something hard. Admittedly, many of them were rather violent. Getting news like that was bad on even the best of days, but receiving it while my head was filled with grief and not a small amount of alcohol? Even worse. The messenger's face was contorted in fear and worry. It was impossible to control my anger while hearing that citizens of mine were slaughtered. My aura had flared strongly and abruptly, with no respite. "Chris, calm down," Abigail soothed, and for a moment, I had forgotten there were people around me. "We need to think about this rationally." Rationally? I asked when words finally came to me. There is only one rational option. It takes days to reach the mine. If the messenger is only just arriving, the attack is long over. Abigail said like I didn't already know that. When I said there was one option, I did not mean running off toward the mine. I said, still seething, I walked off toward the castle at a brisk pace. The fire we had been drinking around only had Hal and Abigail left, excluding myself. The rest had gone off to bed at various points in the night, which left only those two to follow after me. It took Abigail only a moment to gather my meaning. "No, you don't mean to." "I do," I said firmly, and it wasn't only my anger behind the decision. They were warned, and they did so anyway. They made their choice. It is now time to show them the consequences. "The city isn't lightly defended," Hal informed. "I've already told you of what they had in place, and they'll likely have more if they did this deliberately." "It matters little," I said. "One way or another, they will face the consequences. I will make them. Chris, now is not the time to be making such large decisions. We should take the night to think about it carefully and come up with—" "No," I cut Abigail off. "There is no point in waiting." Abigail got angry at my dismissiveness. "We should take a moment to think about things without resorting to impulsiveness. The only thing we know is that the mine was attacked and nothing else. What if this is a deliberate provocation? What if this attack is meant to send you raging off toward their city, where an ambush or a trap awaits? All I'm saying is that we should take more than 5 seconds before we rashly jump to a conclusion." Her words were heard, but I didn't much care. Even if there was an ambush or if this attack was a trap, it was something to face head-on. My reasoning was simple. Even if this is all an elaborate trap, it makes no difference. There is still only one path, and that path is forward, I said. By this time, we had reached the castle and made it to my destination. In my office, there was a gift from Austin hanging on the wall. At the time, when Austin first gave it to me, he had meant it as a joke. "If you're diving into this aesthetic, you might as well go in with both feet." He'd said it with a toothy smile while handing it over. But now I saw it as something different. The wannabe Viking war horn, he had called it. The horn was from a Deerank bison Austin had killed himself before he commissioned it carved. The man wasn't one to take half measures, and he had Gabriel enchant it as well. It was a gift I never imagined I would use. It had one purpose and one purpose only: to project sound in as wide an area as possible. "Did you listen to a word I said?" Abigail shouted as I picked up the horn from my wall. "Yes, I did," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "But you forget something." Her rebuttal died as she ran through what she could possibly be missing. "Precedent." "Precedent?" Abigail asked, confused both at the change of direction and my change in tone. "We must set a precedent. We must show everyone what happens when you don't heed my warning. We must show what happens when you attack what's ours. We must show what happens when you kill my citizens," I said, the anger coming back. "Provocation? Traps? Ambushes? So what? We will not sit and delay our response, waiting for more information that may or may not come when in the end, We will march on Lakeshore either way. Abigail assumed I was reacting on impulse. While she wasn't entirely wrong, she wasn't entirely right either. My first impulse was to attack Lakeshore, but it wasn't just my impulse talking. It was also the future. It was best to be clear, open, and glaringly obvious about our response to such actions, so that anyone who entertains such ideas in the future knows what awaits them. There would be no half measures, no concessions, no talks to diffuse the situation. No. Diplomacy was offered and rejected at the same time. My warning wasn't heeded. Now it was time for everyone to learn that if they chose to poke the bear, they should expect a response. A disproportionate response. I held the horn in my hands but didn't raise to blow it hurriedly. Instead, I looked at Abigail. I will do this with or without you, but I would like to have your support. I knew I was asking for a lot. Abigail hesitated to make even the smallest decision, and now I was asking her to rush quite a large one. Something this big, she would want hours to think it through, testing all the options she could come up with. I had given her the time it took to walk here. Still, she nodded. You have it. Always. Good, I said, and looked at Hal. How many blasts for war? While I was the nominal head of the city, I wasn't actually involved in every detail. It was Hal and his scouts who had come up with the horn system and how many blasts meant what. 4, he said. 4 means muster for war. So be it. I raised the horn to my mouth and blew. Elliot POV. Order of the Bear Headquarters. Frostheim. Honk. Elliot woke with a start, jumping out of bed in one solid leap that sent sheets and covers flying in all directions. He'd been peacefully sleeping off a few drinks from the tavern when his sleep was so rudely interrupted by an ear-splitting blast of sound. The vibration was so deep and strong that he felt it in his bones. The sound felt physical, as he felt it reverberate through him. What in the blazes was that? Honk. Another blast just as deep and just as rattling. Sleep evaporated as his mind understood what was happening. It was a war horn. 1 blast for enemy spotted. 2 for friends returning. 3 for under attack. The system he drilled into his order came to his mind swiftly after the second blast. His heart hesitated to beat as we awaited a third. Any blast past 2 was bad and required immediate action. Whether that be throwing on armor for an attack or something else. Honk. 3. Fuck. Elliot ripped the sheets off and dressed quickly. His underclothes were already on, thankfully, and all he had to do was put his armor on atop it. The metal flowed as it reshaped to make dressing easier. One of the key perks of his affinity. He didn't have to bother with all the clasps and straps like most warriors. As it was halfway formed around him, he stopped. Honk. 4? The first 2 were common occurrences, and hearing 1 or 2 blasts happen weekly. 3 was for drills and tests to practice for when an attack actually happened. There had never been 4 before. It took an extra second to remember what 4 meant. The rhyme felt like ash now. Muster for war. Elliot's face turned grim. The urgency he felt at potentially defending the walls against a beast or other sudden attack fell away as dread and anger bubbled up in its place. Dread, for only something seriously bad would prompt such a response. Anger, for the dead that were no doubt the cause of it. Elliot wouldn't claim to know Christopher for a long time, but the years they had spent together felt longer. Fighting side by side made connections that were only a few weeks old feel like lifetimes. Over the time he'd spent with the man, there were only a few things he'd seen him truly get mad over. For the most part, he was an affable and easygoing person to get along with, unless you pushed his buttons. The one thing that always set him off enough to call to war in the middle of the night was if someone died. He didn't allow the emotions to slow him. His armor formed around him quickly, and he moved on to preparing a bag. Muster meant bringing weapons, armor, and supplies for a march. He had to ready quickly, as his next action was to take charge of his order, as there was inevitably some chaos among them right now. Lakeshore. Elliot thought it has to be. Chris POV. I lowered the horn from my lips and clipped it onto my belt. It was done. The entire city was kicked awake as the horn was even more impressive than I assumed. Loud was the first impression, then the next was deep, as the note it held was a low bass that rattled the bones. Abigail, inform and gather the family. See which of them will march with us. I said. Hal, see to your order. Both nodded and left. I suspected those of the family who would come were the same as those who went south for the test, but we would see when the time came. Alone in my office, there were only a few things I had to do. I had woken everyone up and kicked them into motion, but the rush was for those readying mounts and wagons, those packing food and sundries into carriages. I passed through the door to my forge in the adjoining room, as nearly everything I needed was in there. My armor, a new set I had made, sat on a stand ready to be put on. Every clasp fastened or strap tightened as I dressed in its comforting weight solidified what I had to do in my head. The decision to attack wasn't something I took lightly, but it was the only option left. Killing my fellow man was never fun, and I much preferred to keep my killing to monsters, but if needs must. Sophia came rushing into the room looking frazzled. Her appearance looked like she jumped straight from bed and rushed here. Her night clothes showed under the heavy furs she was wearing, and her hair was a mess compared to the usual professional bun she kept it in. Pack a bag if you would. One that will last a few months. That was all I needed to say before she was off. It was nice to have a helper. After dressing in my heavy metal armor, I walked to the corner of the room where my hammer sat. I stopped and took a breath before hefting it. It slid around and stuck to my back through a new magical addition. The ice I used to stick it to my back wasn't necessary anymore, as I finally worked out the enchantment for it. The hammer added to an already heavy weight on my shoulders. My weapon and armor carried an additional weight, other than the metal, leather, and ice that made it up. A foreboding weight. Something told me I wasn't going to like what I was about to do. The weight didn't stop or even slow me. I would do what I must. Chapter 334, 2 hours. Gavin POV. Frostheim. Hal was nowhere to be found, and Gavin wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. Younger, lower-level members were looking at him as if he were in charge, and Gavin most certainly was not. He didn't know anything more than they did. Why were they looking at him like he did? Still, he did the only thing that made any sense and sent everyone towards the courtyard inside the inner wall. When they drilled for 3 horns, they all had specific spots on the outer wall they were supposed to fill. Gathering for War didn't have a dedicated spot. It didn't have any plans for where everyone was supposed to go. An oversight, but one they couldn't do anything about now. I should never have agreed to be a lieutenant, Gavin thought. The Order of the Wolf used to be structured simply. One captain with all the members under him. That was fine when there were only a few dozen people. Now, the Order had over 500 members. Elliot's had even more. They'd taken tremendous losses over a year ago, but they'd grown past their previous numbers already. New people joined up every day, and after they returned with such goodies, the benefits were too hard to ignore for some. At such numbers, further structure was needed, and Gavin just so happened to be one of them. Why did I say yes? Gavin, while guiding the newer members he happened across, made his way towards the castle as quickly as he could. He saw a few other people he knew, but they just shook their heads at his questioning gaze. No one knew anything. The inner gate was already open by the time he got there, and people were already amassing. Warriors in full plate that looked ready to unsheath weapons at any time, rangers in full leather ready to knock and loose, and everyone in between. Mages stood among the crowd, loose and haphazard, as they didn't have a formal order yet but had sworn the oaths. They were still figuring out who would lead them. Their numbers were fewer but were still many. Healers had it easier, as Ashley was already among the crowd, attracting them all in one direction. They weren't an order per se, but they sure acted like one. It was only a matter of time for them as well. The only class that didn't have one already or would have one soon was rogues, but they had something else. I don't even want to think about those people. They were shadows in the wind. Over 1,500 people stood waiting to figure out what was going on. More than they had ever fielded. Not against the demons or against the orcs. Whatever it is, they're fucked with these numbers. Not to mention the big guns. While the rank and file filled in, so too did the higher-ups. Hal and Elliot came walking out of the castle together whispering about something, marking the first D-rank arrival. Sydney, a fellow lieutenant of his, rushed in from the gates, her hair a mess and her bow half-strung. Seeing that so many people had turned at her appearance, she quickly fixed herself and walked confidently towards the front of the crowd. Anders, Elliot's vice-captain, rushed in next, the giant bear of a man. He even had his axe unsheathed, like he was rushing towards an imminent fight. Hugo and Valerie walked in next, the duo of warriors making their way towards their captain and vice-captain. Nearly a dozen D-ranks shuffled in, but all of them paled in comparison to the next arrivals. The castle doors swung open and out filed 6 people who felt stronger than any D-rank they had, maybe save Elliot, and some of them hadn't even evolved yet. The city lord, Christopher, in full armor and hammer. The mayor with her staff in hand. Jonathan with full armor and both shields strapped to his back. Rachel with a similarly powerful staff to the mayor, but with a ruby-red core at its top rather than a deep blue. Mitchell and Carrie were lesser known to Gavin, but they each were armed and armored as they exited the castle. A hush fell over the crowd as they all waited in anticipation for why they were called, especially to learn who they were off to fight this time. More demons? Beasts? Something else? Christopher stepped upon a pillar of gathered snow to address everyone. I have just learned that our mine was attacked. The details are still scarce, but we do know many did not survive. We know of at least 24 people who were killed, and we estimate even more will be added to that number after we finish investigating. 4 days ago, during the dead of night, Lakeshore sent forces to kill and raid what they could. This attack comes after our warning to back off. They were told what would happen should they fail to do so, and now it has come time to deliver onto them what they were promised. I have stood before you and asked you to fight demons. I have stood before you and asked you to fight orcs. And now, I stand before you and ask that you fight men. This is the first time I am asking you to march on your fellow man, and I understand the heavy task that I am asking. I feel it myself, but it is one that is necessary. We must show that avenging our own is inherent, not a chance possibility if things line up just right. Inherent not only to our enemies, should they choose such a path, but also to everyone here. So that every single person sworn to me and this city knows that you matter. So that every citizen of Frostheim knows that they matter. That no one can kill citizens of our city and get away with it. The march will take 28 days until we get there. You have until then to come to terms with what I am asking of you. We leave in 2 hours. Gavin was stunned. His eyes followed Christopher as he stepped down and let the gathered snow break apart, but his brain was going over what he had learned. I was the one who told them they were scouts around the mine, but I never thought it would come to this. Gavin's main question was why? Why would Lakeshore decide to attack anyway, after being warned? Then the sadness hit. He knew a few of the guards stationed there. They were rotated as it wasn't a fun gig, but he had drank with a few of them on duty now. And now they were dead. The miners, too. All right, wolves, we move out in 2, so gather everything you need. Wagons of food will be brought with us, so pack light rations. Only 1 quiver is fine, as more will be available if you run out. Health and mana potions will be handed out later, Captain Hal shouted. Now get to it. That kicked Gavin into gear. He had his orders, and now it was to get to them. The crowd broke apart quickly, and Gavin made off toward the stables. It was the common jab at him that he was in charge of more wolves than men, but that came with the territory. His unit was the Bonded Wolves unit. Every ranger or hunter who had taken the skill and bonded to a wolf was under his command, which included all the wolves. It also had him working closely with Sarah, as she was the caretaker and person in charge of all the stables. Those housing wolves, horses, or bison. She had a way with the beasts he couldn't even understand, and that was after being bonded to one for over a year. She was probably off readying the mounts or workhorses, so he wasn't surprised when the stable was empty of humans. The wolves were already up and pacing, nervous about what was happening. I know. The horn was loud and startling. The others will be here soon, and we're heading out not long after that. Gavin had always talked to his dog and dictated what they were going to do, and he'd continued once he was in charge of the wolves. They weren't smart enough to understand human speech, but they understood more than people thought. The men and women in his unit entered not long after him and walked up to their chosen companions. Gavin did the same as he walked up to the biggest wolf in the stable. "Let's go, dog." A name that wasn't as funny anymore. Not when he pictured his giant muzzle ripping people apart like he was about to. Chris POV. The gathered orders dispersed, and the flurry of activity only got more fervent. They had gone from all rushing toward the castle to rushing all over the place to gather and ready what was needed. Sophia and Grace were directing traffic expertly, and I only had one more thing to get. I needed to ready my mount. The stable inside the inner wall only had a few beasts in it, as it was dedicated to family use only. In it were both of my mounts. Remy, the warhorse I acquired so long ago, and Icebreaker, the bison Austin had gifted me. "I'm sorry, Remy. Not this time." I moved past the chuffing stallion and went towards the multi-ton bison. "I need something a bit heavier this time." We would be charging towards a heavily fortified position, and Icebreaker was the better choice. There hadn't been enough time to saddle train him before we left for the test, but there had been more than enough time by now. There usually wasn't a point to ride into battle, as I wasn't sure anything could survive the charges I took part in. Remy, especially, wasn't sturdy enough to live through it, and even if he did, I couldn't fight upon his back. Icebreaker was different. Sarah cared for him well, and he had grown into something I could ride. Long-haired bison, level 128. He had reached D rank faster than I had. I wasn't sure how the fighting would go or if I would end up riding him this time, but I wanted the option to. If, for whatever reason, they decided to face us in the open instead of behind their walls, Icebreaker would make that charge something to behold. He snorted as I saddled him, but otherwise stayed still. My bags and cargo probably felt like nothing to him, and I doubted I was much worse as I jumped up, even with all my gear, hammer and all. It wasn't long before I was marching him through the city gates. Him and a herd of other mounted bison behind me, then followed by wagon after wagon, then by over 1,000 people. It would take a month, but we would soon deliver vengeance. It's starting. This is the spark. I'm sure of it. I know that Frostheim and Lakeshore are both far to the north and there isn't much around them, but I'm certain that after this, something will change. 1,000 people filled with righteous fury have just marched on Lakeshore with the Baron leading the charge. He's either going to freeze Lakeshore off the face of the map, or he's going to die trying. Bennett. A letter frantically sent south at the same time. Chapter 335, They're Coming. Victor POV. Lakeshore. They were coming. Deep down, Victor knew they would, but there was a small part of him that thought they might posture and demand recompense, but those stages were skipped over completely. Nope. Straight to war. They didn't even send a declaration or anything. They probably assume it's already been declared after the mine. Victor was given a month to prepare, and he did everything he could feasibly do. There wasn't much left to accomplish other than wait. The arrogance, Victor seethed. That was the only thing it could be. He knew the man was strong. What he did to the demons proved that, but to assault his city. The city he'd spent years building up and fortifying to the extreme? Arrogance. The man hadn't even evolved yet. From what the advanced scouts could gather on their strength and numbers, there were 20 suspected D-ranks. They had confirmation on a few, like the mayor and her husband, but they could only guess at the others. Stupid blockers. Stupid scouts, actually. If they were better, it wouldn't be an issue. Even with the most generous assessment, there were 20 D-ranks among the army of 1,500. 20. While that was impressive and outnumbered how many Victor's forces had, it still wasn't enough to offset the defensive advantage. The shadows twisted and bent in a familiar, if irritating way. "You're back," Victor stated. "Do you have what I asked for?" "I told you I wouldn't miss it." Maeve stepped out of the shadow and handed him a bag. Similar to the one he had handed her not that long ago, except this bag wasn't filled with coins and valuable gems. Contained refined demon blood. When used as ink, the contracts signed were unbreakable. It latched onto the spirit like a parasite and made sure the contract was enforced to the letter. Victor's entire army had signed one, and now he had enough ink to create even more. An extra few hundred right before they were needed. His hand felt the bag through the leather and knew that it was off. It was heavy. Too heavy. Pulling it open, he saw that the well of ink was bigger than what he had paid for. This is more than I thought. Maeve smiled. Let's just say it's a gift. He thinks doing business with the North will be difficult if that man remains the sole power in the region. This is to help you take him down a notch or two. Victor was glad at the additional ink, but frowned at the explanation. If he thinks that, why didn't he send forces to help me? Maeve tisked. Oh, Victor, I've told you already. You aren't worth the exposure. Sure, the Baron will make business difficult, but not difficult enough to out our organization over. This is all the indirect help he was willing to give. Victor didn't want to deal with the woman any longer than he had to. I've got things to prepare then. Oh, I have no doubt. Maeve waved as Victor turned and left. Writing up the contracts would take the longest time, but the contract expert was getting quick with them. The receptiveness helped. Too bad they can't be stamped. Still, by the time the enemy army arrived, he'd have over 200 more loyal soldiers. Victor paced in his office, going through all the possible plans in his head over and over again. The wards were reinforced, the wall was ready, and everything was in place, but he couldn't help but think he was missing something. It didn't feel like enough, even though by every metric of the imagination, it was. It only got worse as the days ticked on. He knew the army was getting closer and closer. The day he expected a scout to run in reporting a successful trap going off, the opposite had happened. The marching army had noticed the arcane traps placed on their path and had set them off prematurely. The kicker? They were noticed by wolves. Actual wolves. Victor had been prepared for a high-level trapper with trap detection or other similar skill, but not the nose of wolves. Every other impediment Victor had planned was foiled in a similar fashion. The traps were found, the ambushing units were noticed, and the poison fog was rendered useless by fire. One fire mage burned it all up. One. The poison was supposed to be resistant to fire, yet it was burned anyway. Failure after failure had set Victor on edge. He'd done more pacing in the last few days than he had since the change. This blasted weather doesn't help, he growled. Every time he looked out of the window, he was reminded of what was coming. After the turn of winter, the snow had started in earnest, and gray clouds blanketed Lakeshore through day and night, unloading inch after inch of white snow upon his city. It felt like an omen of what was to come, even though Victor knew that was absurd. It was winter. It snowed in winter. It wasn't the Baron at work trying to physiologically torture him. No matter how he tried to rationalize it, he couldn't help but grow more frustrated with every inch of it that fell. It all came to a head a month and a day after the attack. 31 days after his decision to attack the mine and steal the crystals. Victor had called a meeting of all his captains for one last strategy meeting before the army arrived and their city was officially under siege. The scouts say they will arrive tomorrow, Victor stated to the room. It held 4 of his strongest captains, the ones who had been with him the longest. Ren, the leader of the Rangers, Des, the leader of the Rogues, Quentin, the leader of the Warriors, and Olivia, the leader of the Mages. Ren, if you would, Victor stated. They number 1764. We don't know the exact breakdown by class, but we can estimate 35% are Warriors, 30% are Rangers, 20% are Mages, and the last 10% are healers. What about the other 5%? Des interrupted. And what about rogues? Some of the other 5% are rogues, but they don't employ a lot of them. Most we see are closer to light warriors than true rogues. Ren said, but most of the 5% is buffer. We don't have any exact numbers, so there is still some wiggle room. We're basing our numbers on weapons and armor type, but those could be a misdirect as well. We outnumber them. Why don't we just go out and crush them where they stand? Quentin huffed, both his bloodlust and hot-headedness showing. A flaw Victor hated, for it was idiotic, and loved, for it made him easy to manipulate. Sure, if you think you can beat them in the open. Go right ahead, musclehead. Olivia teased. Not only would that be giving up our greatest advantage for nothing, but they also have cavalry. Heavy cavalry at that. Who thinks to domesticate bison? She mumbled. Come on, Q. Just because you're a berserker doesn't mean you can't use your head. Des piled on. Shut up, Victor commanded. Now is not the time for silliness. If it wasn't already clear, an army arrives at our gates tomorrow. Cut this bullshit and let's get serious. After there was sufficient time for his words to sink in, he nodded for Ren to continue. Our preemptive attempts to thin their numbers failed. They detected the traps and ambushes, and the ones that did go off failed to cause more than minor injuries. From this, we can figure that any force we try to sneak around or keep outside the walls to attack the rear will be found in a similar manner. What was the detection method? Was it the smell of something physical, like the people who placed the trap scent, or something magical, like sniffing out the literal mana in the trap? Olivia asked. We don't know, Ren answered. Only a few of the wolves were D rank, but even the lower-level ones could find some of the traps. It doesn't matter at this point. Des pointed at the map in front of them. They're already here. It matters because if it were only physical, we could work around that with magic, Olivia articulated. We'll test it tonight, Victor said before allowing a smile to form. Des, send some of your best to give the Baron a visit. At least one who uses magic for stealth and one who relies on skill. Des, the sadist he was, matched his smile. My pleasure. If it succeeds, great. If it doesn't, we get to see how they are detected, Victor stated. While that may change things depending on the result, the majority of the plan still stands, Ren resumed. The wards only reinforce and strengthen the walls, so any ranged attack can still make it over them, but that's if they're willing to bombard the city. We aren't sure if this is something they're willing to do or not, with the city being full of people. The Baron could be ruthless and do it anyway, but maybe he won't. Trying to get a read on him and his specific code of honor is tricky. He's charitable and defends the weak on one hand and then kills people and sentences them to hard labor with the other. Des snorted at what his perceived hypocrisy, but Ren ignored it. We haven't seen any siege weapons among the army, but that doesn't mean they won't build them. If they do build them and decide to use them, the plan is to target the projectiles with either magic or arrows to shoot them down before trying to destroy the siege weapons themselves. You're going to shoot down boulders with arrows? Des quipped. Yes, with specific arrows and skills designed to empower the arrow and make it explode on contact. That will then break the boulder apart, Ren explained. This is all well and good, Quentin said. But what will I be doing? You, Ren turned to him, will be holding the walls. Your job is to fight anyone who climbs, jumps, or otherwise scales the walls. Quentin nodded but didn't seem enthused about it. And, on the off chance they breach the gates, you are to defend them. That got the berserker more excited. The thought of bloody battle always did. Why off chance? Do you think them uncapable? Olivia questioned. Ren pointed at the more detailed map that only showed the city and its immediate surroundings. It showed all of the catapults along the wall and had markings for where the archers would stand. It also marked the quite ridiculous ranges of both respectively. To breach the walls, they'll first have to reach them. That means traveling hundreds of yards under the fire of dozens of catapults and over 1,000 archers and mages. Even if they fight through that, regardless of the losses, the gate is a totally different problem. It's made from D-rank wood from the store, carved by a journeyman woodworker with skills focused on durability, not to mention the enchantments placed on it. It has the defensive ward that runs through the entire wall, along with other, specific enchantments to increase its durability. Quentin, in his full rage and bloodlust, couldn't break through it, and he has 1,500 strength. With his full boosts, that's closer to 2,500. Olivia nodded. Okay, it's durable, but can it be sustained? The wards aren't cheap once they're activated. Victor fielded this one. We have enough mana crystals to keep the wards active for days. The raid was more lucrative than we assumed it would be. It also finally allowed his dungeon to reach D-rank, but only just. They couldn't afford to dump crystals into it with an army on the way. Oliva was satisfied, and Ren was given back the floor. The most likely outcome is they try to use hooks or ladders to scale them, rather than go through them, but even if they, for whatever reason, decide to go through them, it would take a battering ram and mountains of time. Time that we would use to destroy it. Ren said. It would be a sitting duck for siege spells. It would be impossible to miss. Oliva said. Right, that or bombs we can drop on them. It is highly unlikely they will choose to do so. Ren detailed. Now, back to the more likely case, scaling the walls. We'll have the warriors spread out and ready to repel them. But should they manage to create a foothold, we can use those same bombs to dig them out along with concentrated fire. Victor listened to the rest of Ren's speech but kept some of the details to himself, rather than share them. Sure, bombs would work to dig out anyone who made it atop the walls, but so too would a catapult. Ren was worried about friendly fire while Victor didn't give a shit. If it won the battle, he'd kill hundreds of his own men to make it happen. Tomorrow would be a day of triumph. One way or another. Chapter 336. Justification and Reticence. Chris POV. Camp outside Lakeshore. The walls look strongest here, here, and here. If we are to break through any spot, it would be here on the backside facing the lake. The other 3 sides facing land have recently been reinforced, yet they neglected the side facing the water. Hal detailed the information he had gotten from the scouts. Some of them even had skills dedicated to identifying weak points, but they were low rarity. There hadn't exactly been a lot of chance to use them. We can't exactly attack via water, now can we? Jonathan rebutted. We have no ships, and even if we did, that would put us at a disadvantage. Amphibious landings are always more difficult. We can wait, Abigail reasoned. That part of the lake usually freezes over, and with winter just begun, it should soon, especially if we help it. A few heads turned in my direction. I do not want to wait. It is also not my intention to rush things for no reason. But laying siege to Lakeshore for months was not what I had planned when I blew the horn. It doesn't matter what you intended back then. It matters what we are going to do now. You want to assault the city, I get that, but we also need to do it without getting all of us killed. Hal said. Or what would be the point? I studied the markings on the map deep in thought. I can freeze a small area, sure, but it won't be enough. While the southern side facing the lake is comparatively weaker, it still has defenses. The range of their weapons, arrows, and spells would require us to go out hundreds of yards into the water. I sighed. If it were only 50 yards or just 100, I could maybe do it with help, but it wouldn't be worth it and it would take weeks. Not to mention, they would counter our attempts with fire or another alternative. Even with the help of every ice mage we have? Abigail posed. Yes, even then, I answered. It wasn't often I had to admit to things that were outside my capability, but freezing over 1,000 cubic yards of water was one of them. Even with help. Then by land, then. Hal transitioned. That limits our options to 3. Over, though, or under. My base instinct was always through, but I didn't voice it immediately. Going through appealed to the primal part of me that liked to smash through every obstacle in my path, but that was hardly conducive reasoning to throw out the other options right off the bat. They used sappers in history to get around fortifications like walls. Dig a tunnel to ruin the foundation of the wall, causing a portion to collapse. Or plant explosives later in history. Jonathan answered. Besides siege weapons, of course. How is that going, Elliot? I asked. Professions were wildly varied among the orders, but an above-average number of those with engineer, builder, or carpenter were in Elliot's, for some reason. They were in charge of building the trebuchets. The wood has been treated, measured, and cut. All that's left is to build them. It won't take long after we get there to put them together. He answered. The boulders wouldn't take much longer, as earth mages were a thing of beauty in cases like this. There was the option to enchant some of them or otherwise empower either the machine or the projectile, but we could make that decision when we got there. We wouldn't know if that was needed until we saw how powerful their wall and wards were, and we couldn't know that until they activated it, which they would most likely do when we arrived in the morning. I'm still not comfortable with that, Abigail voiced. There are innocents in the city, thousands of them. We can't just bomb the city like we did in the tutorial. We'd talked about that option briefly before, but it was put aside then. It wasn't worth hashing out at the time. Now it had come up once again. You guys did this in the tutorial? Elliot asked, confused. It was sometimes easy to forget he hadn't been with us then. Yes, we did, I said. A man had an army of mind-controlled beasts and human thralls inside a city that we attacked, similar to this, actually. And you guys? Yes, we bombed the city and set fire to it, I said without remorse. It was what was necessary. Elliot coughed uncomfortably, but nodded in understanding. We've been over this, Abigail. Side note aside, I turned back to Abigail's objection. We will warn them. Ask the innocent to exit the city if they can, or otherwise find a suitable position to wait out the siege. Worst case, ask them to vacate the area near the walls. Yes, the leaflet defense. That worked out well in history. We're gonna bomb your city. Please leave. Abigail scoffed. Turning trebuchets on the city has incredible potential to have unintended casualties. It was my turn to scoff. Attacking the city has already assumed the risk of unintended casualties. No matter what we do, there will be unintended casualties. We will announce our presence, our intention to siege the city, and express the potential danger of not heeding our words. After that, what? She pressed. After that, the fault does not lie with us. Finished. The fault? Is that what you just said? The fault? I can't be. Abigail, I silenced her outburst. I will not hinder myself and potentially incur even more deaths of our citizens just because of the fear of unintended casualties. While it is not my goal to cause them, so too will I not veer away from them to our detriment. She was quiet for a beat, and when she spoke, it wasn't the heated and loud tone from before, but a colder, resigned one. All of that was a convoluted way of saying it's better them than us. She was right. It was a way of saying better them than us, but it was the path we had set out on when we first left. That hadn't changed in the month it had taken to march here. Before we left, I asked if you were with me, and you said yes. I redirected. But I won't force this upon you. I won't drag you kicking and screaming to do it. I looked at her and turned to the others. Any of you, I've asked, but I won't demand. If I must do this alone, so be it. Abigail pursed her lips. All of this for an attack on the mine. My face hardened. Abigail, while I understand your reticence against this course of action, don't trivialize this. People are dead. Over 40 of our citizens are dead. Murdered. And the person responsible sits just over there. The month had done a lot to take the edge off, but it hadn't taken away my resolve. While it may have dimmed it, it hadn't taken away my anger at the fact that people under my banner were killed. Knowingly so. You're right, and I'm sorry, Abigail admitted. I wasn't trying to trivialize their deaths, and I shouldn't have said that, but I also can't as easily use them as justification to cause thousands more. Hearing her words felt odd. Was it wrong that I could? That in my head I could justify exactly that? It felt like, to me, that this line of action was the direct result of cause and effect. They attacked the mine, we attacked their city. Cause followed by effect. It was the natural outcome, all I was doing was following through. Is it all the death that's changed me? Or was I always like this? It was hard to think back on how things used to be. I could only guess at and wonder if my past self would feel justified in the here and now. All I knew was that the me sitting here now felt justified. Maybe all the deaths and all the fighting had changed me, but even if it did it matter? That was only natural. People grew and changed from experiences, especially traumatic ones. I had never set out to have people to call my own. Never intended to feel protective over citizens under my banner, the people who had sought out my protection, but I did. It was only now that I realized that I was protective enough to kill for them, to avenge those who had fallen. While I sat there, thinking about the past and whether I had changed, the room was mainly quiet after our back and forth. Quiet until someone broke it. You'll have me. Elliot was the brave one to break it. You won't do this alone, you'll have me. I knew some of the miners and guards who were killed. I won't let you fight alone. I agree, Hal spoke up next. Both captains had sent their members as guards, and both orders had lost people. It wasn't a surprise that they were the first two to speak up. One by one, the rest of them voiced their approval. Only Abigail hadn't, and we all turned to her. I said you had my support, and you still do. I just ask that we try to keep things contained. Good. We shall try, but I make no promises. I nodded. Now we have a battle to prepare for. Sunrise won't wait for us to be ready. We got back into planning somewhat somberly, but it was without any further deviations. Everyone had said their piece, and now it was time to go through with it, for better or worse. It wasn't a surprise to me that Abigail was so heavily against it. While the initial call to arms had been quick, the time it had taken to finally face the music had given her time to think, to go over things with a fine-tooth comb, and she was nothing if not good at doing that. It wouldn't surprise me if she had second-guessed every decision leading up until this point along the way. It wasn't so far as to say she got cold feet, but they were certainly chilly. It was late into the night that we finally exited the tent. Later than I planned. With us arriving the following day, this was the last chance to rest without being in an active siege. Tonight was the last night until it was over, however long should it take. My tent was set up just the same as it had been before the orcs. It was familiar to be back in it again. The first time I'd set it up along the trip felt nostalgic, both good and bad. But now it was just familiar. It was where I had lived for nearly a year on the way back. Sadly, I didn't bring something as valuable as the ice bed, which left me sleeping on simple furs instead. I did fluff it up with some snow, but it wasn't the same as the bed's energies, even though it tried. My armor stand stood in the corner, covered in what I would wear. It was the before picture where the metal was pristine and polished, unmarred by both battle and blood. My hammer sat next to it, calmly waiting to be used. A small armoire, a trunk, a small table, and a pair of chairs were the last items that made up the tent besides decoration. Apparently, my tent was too drab for a titled baron. My sister had ganged up with Sophia to decorate it, so it wasn't just fur and canvas. A soft, luxurious rug covered most of the ground from a D-rank wolf I had fought. I had aimed for a bear, but had settled for the wolf after searching. A few smaller knickknacks were set along the tent walls, but it was otherwise drab, as they described it. It was how I liked it. I had rested a day prior and didn't necessarily need to sleep again, but since tomorrow was the big day, I settled into sleep once again. I wasn't sure whether to be glad or horrified that it came easier than expected. I woke up alert and confused. My mind was firing fast, like I was in battle, even though I was just in my bed. What in the aura detection flared as I covered the camp. It picked up nothing, but I couldn't help but feel. A dagger appeared out of nowhere and began plunging toward my chest. Instincts triggered. My hand shot up and grabbed the offending wrist, only to hear sickening snaps followed by a cry of pain. The wrist in my hand had shattered like plywood under my full, undampened strength. I didn't waste time trying to figure out a level or compare who was stronger. I reacted with a punch to where I assumed the person to be standing. My right hand clamped on the offender's wrist, so it was my left that tore through what appeared to be a weak barrier, until I felt the warm liquid sensation of blood on my skin. The familiar metallic scent filled the tent, and it dripped from my extended arm. My arm was through the man's torso. I was soundly sleeping, and in less than a second, I was elbow deep in a man's torso. My mind hadn't even caught up with what was happening by the time it was over. Assassins! Assassins! The thought was quickly followed by my alarmed shout. I wasn't worried that it wasn't heard, as it was loud enough to rouse the entire camp. I threw the corpse aside and rushed out of my tent to see chaos. Guards were running around trying to find ghosts while others dressed and armed themselves from a dead sleep. Chaos, but no active fighting or cloaked enemies. Just a camp jumping to alarm. A jet of water tore through the air, and a flapping tent canvas followed after it from Abigail's direction. With her tent ripped into the air, it revealed her and John both in night clothes with a body covered in black at their feet, missing a head. It was also soaking wet and crushed at the same time. Seeing that they were both standing made me focus on the corpse first, to make sure it was dead, but I soon turned back to the couple and found a dagger sticking out of Jonathan's side. Abigail's hands turned a vibrant blue as she removed it and sealed the wound as quickly as she could, but her face was murderous. She saw me looking at her. Fuck unintended casualties. We do what we have to. Hal dashed in next, wielding a short sword instead of his bow. We found 3 more after your shout. We aren't sure if there's more. He turned to Abigail and John, saw that they were both fine, relatively, and turned to me. Ashley, why is he calling for her? I looked down and understood. There's a dagger sticking out of me. I hadn't felt anything, yet here it was. A blade was protruding out of the left side of my chest. Confused me until I figured it out. He didn't even try to defend himself. He plunged a second dagger after he was caught, even though he knew he was dead. The wound was turning a concerning color of black that made it obvious the blade was poisoned. A poison cloud before and now a poison dagger. We'll need to be prepared for more. I ripped out the offending blade and flared frozen patchwork to seal over the wound. The poison, on the other hand, was more difficult. My natural resistance was high, but not invulnerable. My high fortitude helped my body resist while vitality attempted to fight it off. My body of stone also helped, but neither refinements were designed for poison resistance, but there was still a general resistance that came from a stronger body. With Ashley close at hand, along with plenty of other healers, I wasn't that worried. But it didn't give me warm and fuzzy feelings about tomorrow. If they resorted to this, what will they do then? Chapter 337, 3 hours. Victor POV. Lakeshore. They failed, boss, Des reported. Even though it was information Victor had assumed from the outset. Did they get any? Victor responded dispassionately. He wasn't holding out hope. The assassins were good, but they weren't great. There wasn't exactly a lot of opportunity or need to employ their services. The few times Victor had used them, they were one-off deals that rarely resulted in a return trip. It was hard to gain levels like that. Wounds, I hear, but nothing serious. Magical stealth worked best, but even they were caught. Those that landed attacks died quickly, and the poison didn't do much, like we feared. Des described. The poison was rather expensive comparatively. Not to the level of costing a gold, but up there for something consumable like that, and it hadn't worked. Do you think he has a body of copper? Des couldn't help but ask. The rogue was experienced with the poison used, and for it to be so casually disregarded. No, Victor answered. It's impossible. Even if he's insane and plays loose with the 3,000-point recommendation, there's no way he's that close. Victor had already done the math. Even with both class and profession having the same primary stat, it was impossible to reach the 3,000-point threshold. The closest one could get was around 2,400, and that was with both a legendary class and legendary profession. While that was highly improbable to the point of nearly impossible, he didn't rule it out completely. Still, he assumed the Baron wasn't on that level. If he were, Victor doubted the man would bother with bringing an army. It was most likely a combination of factors. We know he has a ridiculous fortitude along with a stone body. Add a decent healer or healers to that and it makes sense. Victor mused. Des nodded and fell silent, letting Victor think in peace. A rare occurrence lately. It was broken all too soon by Ren entering his office swiftly, obviously holding back news. They're here, he relayed. I can just now see them from the battlements with eagle eye. They had been on the lookout ever since first light, and now they could finally be seen. So they have arrived, Victor sighed. He hadn't put much weight on his preemptive strikes working, but he had at least expected them to do something. Now the army was arriving unharried, with no loss in morale, and no recent losses to exploit. It was an all-around failure. One that didn't bode well for future confrontation. Then let's go see our guests, Victor announced. Both men followed after him as he moved toward the wall. Soldiers parted as he passed, and citizens fled to their homes. A tenseness had settled over the city, and everyone knew something was about to happen, even if they hadn't known an army was approaching. Word had leaked weeks ago. Victor had gone to great lengths to keep Lakeshore isolated, but he couldn't control the flow of information completely. Drumming up the threat and fear of the surrounding beasts was enough to stop the average peasant from seeking to leave. Some still did, but they never made it back. People were surprisingly pliable, after going through a harrowing tutorial and returning to ruins. After years of stoking such fears, Even the threat of an army approaching didn't provoke many to flee the city. Most of the outspoken and independent of them had already left early on, after Victor had cut off access to the dungeon to those not under contract. They weren't willing to remain powerless, and Victor was happy to see them leave. He was even happier to kill them in the woods for their essence. What was left was the most susceptible, gullible, and most importantly weak, so that they hung on his every word and announcement. If Victor had the ink and resources, he would have put every citizen under unbreakable contracts, but that wasn't feasible nor efficient. Not for nearly 10,000 people. His army of just over 2,000 had already strained what he could afford, both in resources and body supply. Any more, and he'd be inducting F-rank carpenters into his army. The walk wasn't far, and it wasn't long until Victor was standing atop the battlements with Ren and Desmond at his side. He surveyed the area and couldn't help but notice the numerous changes that had occurred lately. The trees were trimmed back over half a mile, ready for the impending assault. Pits, spikes, and traps riddled the snow-filled grasslands, ready to blunt any charge. Some obvious, sticking out of the snow or in areas cleared of it, while others were hidden, concealed by the thick white carpet covering the land. Catapults sat primed and ready to do the same, not to mention the hundreds of archers and mages. If they wanted to assault his city, Victor was going to make them pay for it. While he didn't have the perception of Ren, Victor could still pick out the moving mass nearing the city. He couldn't pick out specifics, but he could see them, and that was something. He could also see a herd of something that he assumed to be the bison he had heard so much about. It was hard not to, with how utterly outlandish it was. "What are they doing? Can we hit them?" Des asked, eager to begin and land the first real blow, but Victor knew better. "They are still out of range," Ren answered, "and it looks like they are halting their advance." "Halting? Why?" "They are setting up what looks to be a camp." Victor was content to let the two hash it out, but there was something more pressing. "Are there siege weapons?" he questioned. Ren didn't reply immediately, and only after a thorough look did he speak. "Yes. It appears they are setting up trebuchets in the back while others set up a low wall in the front, along with other fortifications. Having them and using them were two different things, but Victory didn't take the Baron for someone frivolous. If he brought them, he planned to use them. "Do you think?" Des mentioned, but switched track. "I thought they said he was honorable." Victor snorted. "They said twistedly honorable. No one said he was a white knight or wannabe hero. Some of their plans were built around the assumption they wouldn't resort to such attacks, but some were there if they did." The three of them watched for over an hour as the enemy prepared, and there was nothing they could do about it. The tension gripping the city only intensified as time wound on. The bell hadn't been rung and they weren't at full attention, but almost every soldier was already on or near the wall. The rest were close enough that it wouldn't take long to reach their positions. Victor was running on an assumption that was proven right not even 2 hours later as a sole person stepped out of the camp and approached the city gate. It walked into range with impunity. Fearless of retaliation, Victor knew there was only one person it could be. The hammer only made it more obvious. "Should we fire?" Ren asked, confused. Victor shook his head. They had the upper hand. Letting the man speak wouldn't change that. "There's no point. Even if we do hit him, I don't think it will do anything. Not unless he stands there and lets us hit him with everything we have." All three of them watched as the man got closer, and he continued until Victor could hear the snow crunch under his boots before he finally halted. It wasn't long before a powerful aura descended on the city. It was larger, thicker, and much denser than the one that delivered the message, and instead of just being there, it actively pressed down on everyone. It turned the nip of winter into a cutting edge. Some of the weaker soldiers on the wall openly shivered, both from the chill and from the mountain pressing down on them. Victor fought it off, but others weren't so lucky. It was a feat Victor himself doubted he could have accomplished, even from within the bounds of the city, let alone from outside of it. "Citizens of Lakeshore, your city is now under siege. We ask all those not affiliated or participating in the fight to leave the city now. If you cannot leave the city, vacate the area near the walls and find shelter, preferably underground. I give my word that all those who do not take up arms will not be intentionally harmed. Those that do will be ended. There will be no quarter given to those that stand against us. You have 3 hours. That was it. The man turned and left, much like the messenger had so long ago. No long preamble, no pleas for surrender or threats, no discussion other than to warn people of what was to come, and give them a deadline. I heard he was brash and upfront, but that was something. No introduction, no declaring his name or faction. He didn't even flaunt his title. Just walked up and said, "We're under siege." Des said. "He's more powerful than I thought," Ren observed. "I couldn't get anything past his blocker. But that aura, he didn't say it, but he didn't have to. Victor knew. It was stronger than his. Aura isn't everything," Victor defended. He didn't know much about the weird phenomenon, but it was only loosely connected to base strength. Stats increased it along with levels and skills, but it was also increased by actions. It wasn't a direct translation of power, but it was a good basis to start that comparison. It could also be amplified by skills or bloodlines, but Victor doubted it was something the Baron had. "We have our timeline," Victor said, ignoring the rest. "Ready the defenders." If it were someone else, anyone else, Victor would have assumed a trick or trap when given a deadline so explicit, but not him. While Lakeshore was isolated and kept in the dark, Victor himself was not. Maeve was a healthy part of his knowledge, but it was foolish to solely rely on the flippant nuisance of a woman. Everything Victor had learned about his current foe told him that the man disdained lying and kept his word religiously. It was something Victor would have played off as an outlandish lie if it hadn't come from so many sources. If the man said 3 hours, it was going to be 3 hours. Even so, Victor wasn't going to wait and ordered his soldiers at the ready with an hour remaining. While they streamed into position and coated the battlements, the citizens were doing the opposite. They were fearful of the wilds already, and the monsters and beasts that lurked in them. Winter was just the cherry on top. None of them were willing to brave the cold weather on the word of someone they didn't know. Victor vilifying the man as the aggressor was just a bonus. While none left the safety of the walls, that didn't mean they did nothing. They fled the area around it nearly as fast as his army readied to defend it. Most sought refuge on the complete other side, hugging the southern wall nearest the lake. Some were fleeing from the aura alone, while most were smart enough to realize the threat if they had stayed. They may have trust in the wall and had witnessed it holding against the many settlement waves, but that didn't mean they would trust it blindly. Victor snorted as he watched the ants tremble and flee. He did nothing and allowed them to do so. There wasn't a point in forcing them not to. It was a waste of effort and manpower, not to mention a pointless blow to morale. The contract binding his soldiers was firm, and if he said defend the wall to the last, he was confident it would be so. That didn't mean morale was pointless. Effort and willingness still played a role, no matter how ironclad the contract was. As time wound near, he felt the growing unease of the soldiers. All of them had faced the bi-monthly waves. They were accustomed to fighting off attackers, but everyone knew this time would be different. It only took a glance at the arrayed army in the field to know that much. Commanders and lieutenants bolstered the ranks by stating the obvious. They reminded everyone of their numbers advantage, of their defender advantage. Victor ignored all of it as he readied himself for what was to come. He stoked the fire inside, priming it for the battle. His mana channels simmered in anticipation, and his core radiated heat that suffused his body. The circle of fire wrapped around it only amplified the flame. He double-checked the potion belt at his side and made sure the vials were ready. Mana and health potions purchased directly from the shop. The best he could buy. 5 blue and red vials that were more expensive than most of his soldiers' armor. His staff glowed with a warm light as his mana cycled through the red gem atop it. The beast core from a D-rank fire demon, remade and enchanted into a staff focus. Victor was ready. Chapter 338, Battering Ram. Chris POV. Lakeshore. The message was delivered, and I ensured that everyone heard it. It was the best I could do, and I had to be content with that, even if it felt like it wasn't enough. 3 hours wasn't a long time, but it was a convenient time. A convenient time for me, at least. I was surprised no one shot at me, but I was left to walk back towards our camp unmolested. I had eyed the weapons and soldiers atop the wall, and wondered if I could take it. It was like the first time I had seen a catapult fired against me. Couldn't help it. What I wondered didn't matter. We would see soon enough. "Sir, everything's ready," Gavin reported. Being bonded to a wolf and having an entire unit like him, he was part of the best trackers we had. "Good. Bring the first one," I said. With a nod and orders relayed to those of his unit, a fox was quickly led in front of me. A heavily armored warrior kept taunting the poor thing, and it had little choice but to follow along. It died quickly, and weight of the Arctic started to build. It felt similar to momentum of the avalanche, but more. While that wasn't very descriptive and could be applied to any skill upgrade, this one was different. The build-up was slower. Took longer to give the same boost, and at first I had thought that was a bad thing, but I wasn't looking at the full picture. Slower also meant smoother, which eased the strain that would otherwise be shouldered straight on my body. It was also a colder, heavier weight, but a weight that didn't press down on me physically like avalanche had. There was still the physical burden of using the skill, obviously, but the weight it applied had other uses than just being burdensome. I could channel it into my aura. Without the need to constantly be working on something or leveling up quickly, I could use my time more freely. Experimenting with skills was a great way to use that time. "Skills are what you make them, not what they say they are," was a saying Gabriel loved. He had said spells, but it also applied to skills. Channeling the weight into my aura was something the description of the skill never mentioned, but a feature I found anyway. My aura was already a heavy and frigid thing, but after adding the skill's influence, it was even worse. The 3-hour build-up was like watching a snowstorm approach and unleash. A blizzard of my own making once it was finished, without any other skills to complement it. Not that my aura spontaneously created a snowstorm, but I could if I wanted to, and that build-up started now. Every few minutes, just under 5 to be exact, a warrior came running up with a beast in tow, and the build-up would continue. Gavin's team was in charge of locating them while the warrior with taunt was in charge of bringing them back. The only reason I felt comfortable starting that timer early was for a few reasons. One being I didn't expect this battle to last long. We would either get through the walls and conquer the city quickly, or we would fail and have to try again. Being on a timer wasn't a hindrance in either case. The second reason was that I needed the strength. I wasn't worried about facing someone individually, but the defenses themselves. The plan, the one I had come up with and Abigail called me stupid for, was simple. To get in, we needed a hole. What better way to create one than with my own body? While some might put faith in the trebuchets to open up that hole, I did not. The walls looked strong, and the ward running through it was impressive. I also knew that it wouldn't run out of power anytime soon courtesy of the raid. The boulders we fling at it might soften it up, but it wouldn't pierce it. That was my job. The poor beasts continued to be led to slaughter while the rest of the army prepared. Weapons were checked and double-checked, armor straps were tightened, and clasps were fastened. It was comforting to see. It was discussed that there was a possibility of the first attack failing. I could see the ward and briefly feel the flow of mana, but I couldn't make out the underlying runes. It was too far away. I wouldn't know the strength of it and the extent of what we were dealing with until I got close and hit it. Still, they readied with a barely concealed confidence. Like the chance of failure wasn't even there, even though it most definitely was. Hour by hour, the weight built, both literally for me and metaphorically for the others. Fewer people than I hoped left Lakeshore, but that was something I couldn't change. I could only hope they listened to the part about not being close to the walls, because what came next wouldn't be good for them. "Chris?" Abigail shuffled through the snow up next to where I had been building my boost. "It's been 3 hours. Are you certain?" "Yes." It was all that needed to be said, and I was happy that she didn't question me further. It would have been odd if she hadn't questioned me at all, but it was nice that it was short and sweet. A simple, "Are you certain?" "Elliot," I called even though the man wasn't far away. He turned at my call. "Now's the time." He nodded firmly and turned to give orders of his own. "Ready artillery." All of the weapons had been assembled, but now it was time to use them. Counterweights hung waiting to be unleashed, and the payloads were filled. The only thing left was to unleash them. Elliot looked at me along with everyone nearby. The entire camp knew the plan. Every single person down to those designated to stay behind and defend the flanks. Orders had already been issued. A pregnant weight filled the air. "Fire," I said. I didn't scream, yell, or give a speech. It wasn't necessary. Our purpose was inherent. Fire! It was repeated down the lines of weapons, and payload after payload was unleashed. The first shot was fired, and we were the ones doing it. Abigail looked resigned, but ready nonetheless. How long until they realize we have the range advantage? I gazed at the large boulders flying through the air with resolve. I think that's already clear. Catapults were a bad matchup against trebuchets. It was the one glaring weakness we were able to see in the city. Their siege weapons were not meant for range like ours were. Admittedly, it took expensive resources and a competent woodworker to prepare the wood used to build them, but the weapons we built were stout. To handle the weight necessary to launch boulders so far, it needed to be. "Now it's my turn," I said and hefted my hammer. The weapon was already bloodied, and it was only going to get worse before the day's end. This part of the plan was fought over extensively. No one liked my idea, but I stood by it. They wanted to build battering rams and siege towers, but I felt all of that wasn't needed. I was as ready as I could be. Weight of the Arctic was maxed. Glacial presence was teetering on its maximum boost of 33%, and I only had one skill left to activate. Winter was a great time for me, as I didn't need to chill the area manually. Battle Fury was easier to ignite after fighting for a time, but it wasn't strictly required. There was something metaphysical that it used in the ignition process, an actual fury or anger that it used as a starter. I had carried a fury in me for a while now, a fury that needed no prelude. All I had to do was think back on my history, and that was all that was needed for a fury like no other to appear. Despite Lucille's claims and tests, the ground shattered under my lunge. It shattered again as I pumped my legs forward. And again with the other leg. A near 200% boost was nothing to laugh at. Not when it was used to propel me toward my foe. I'd already done the math. As my legs strained and I felt the power barely contained in my body, I thought of the numbers my status would read now. Of my effective stats with boost. Strength, 3621, 1876. Agility, 1882, 975. Perception, 1146, 594. Fortitude, 2636, 1366. Endurance, 2117, 1097. Vitality, 1503, 779. The person running at them was a completely different person than the one who approached 3 hours ago. A monster, some might say. The snow welcomed my feet and glacial march pushed me just that much faster. Traps went off one after the other, and I ignored them all. Glacial heavy plate was enough to shrug off such weak attacks. Skill after skill activated, and I pushed myself forward with everything I had. Ahead of me, mana built, and I could feel it being prepared against me. Arrows too, no doubt, but I ignored it all. They killed my people. An unforgivable crime in its own right, but their timing couldn't have been worse. They killed my people a day after I lost my grandmother. And now they would pay. Victor POV. Ready the explosive arrows. Ren shouted as soon as the boulders were in the air. How can they have such range? They had constantly stayed outside of his range, yet they could reach him all the same. What kind of wood are those made of? Des was thinking the same thing Victor was. The boulders flying at them weren't small either. They were larger than a car and no doubt weighed more than them too. Victor trusted the wall and the ward, but this was something else. Fire! Ren ordered when the boulders started to descend from their grim arc. Arrows soared through the air in straight lines from powerful bows and climbed to meet the stones. The total numbers were small, but still plentiful. Nearly 24 boulders were met with just under double that in arrows. A safety factor in case one wasn't enough. The 3 hours were up, and true to his word, not a minute later the attack had begun. Victor was surprised, as he assumed they would line up for one giant charge or wait and bombard them for a while. Instead, as the first volley was in the air, something occurred. Something so outlandish and unexpected. Victor felt like rubbing his eyes to make sure what he was seeing was real. "Is that?" Victor whispered. "Yes, that's him," Des answered absently, as he too was thrown for a loop. "How is he so fast? I thought he was a strength and fortitude build," Ren pointed out. Victor had no words. The only thing he could say was, "I don't know." All three watched as the man sprinted toward them in what could only be described as a death charge. No one else joined him. The entire army, of over 1,700 men, watched as their leader charged the walls alone. Alone. The first line of traps did nothing but tickle him, if that. Explosions Victor had pictured taking out 2 or 3 men each went off to absolutely no effect. The force seemed to part around the ice-covered man and do nothing but provide a stiff breeze. The second line did little better. And so on to the third. "He's insane," Victor couldn't help but utter. He knew the man was mad, but this was on a completely different level. He struggled to comprehend exactly what he was seeing, but he kicked himself into motion quickly enough. The catapults were too slow to track the man's sprint, which left only arrows and spells. "Ready attacks," Victor called out, breaking most of the soldiers out of their confused stupor. Arrows were knocked and spells were prepared. Victor himself readied a potent fire spell, but not one of his most powerful. It wasn't time for that yet, not to mention it would interfere with the others. Another volley of boulders was launched against their city, but Victor allowed Ren to handle that. Instead, he watched, waiting for any sign that this was a feint and the man would turn back, but it never happened. His course never altered from the straight line he had started on. "Fire!" Victor unleashed his spell along with everyone else on the wall. A wave of attacks blanketed the air, and all of them were launched at one man. Something Victor had never thought would occur. He anticipated a dodge, a leap, or jump out of the way of most, but it never happened. The madman continued stomping one foot in front of the other and did little besides brace himself for the collision. And a collision it was. Arrows primed with mana and skills exploded on contact. Spells of all nature collided violently and rocked the area. Fire and water met and exploded in steam. The snow was evaporated in a flash, and the entire area was covered in a smoky haze. A collective breath was held as everyone watched hundreds of attacks land on one man. It was let out in gasps as that same man exited the cloud of steam and smoke looking little worse off. The thick plates of ice were cracked, and some blood trickled down in some spots, but where most expected mincemeat and a corpse, their eyes saw barely any deviation from before the attacks landed. Victor himself sucked in a breath. How? Most were too confused to fire off a second attack except for the cool-headed. The second wave was barely a quarter of the first, and it did even less than that. Victor looked down just in time to see the man approach the gate, and he had little reference for what happened next. The unstoppable object in the form of a man reached the wooden gate, set his feet, and with a might Victor had assumed was impossible, swung his hammer. An explosion of force rattled the wall. The wards flared brightly to dissipate the energy, and the wood creaked, but it held. Hammer met wood and couldn't help but be halted. A breath Victor didn't know he was holding was let out. His eyes watched impossible after impossible, and he couldn't help but worry another would take place. But it hadn't. Good, he thought. Reality wasn't broken. Arrows rained down and spells followed up, and Victor waited to see what the man would do next. He was disappointed to see him run off. After the failed assault, he retraced his steps and ran off toward his camp. You'll have to rethink. The thought died as quickly as he had it. The man reached just outside of range before turning around and running back. Running right back at the gate like he hadn't failed the first time. He's certifiable. Trying the same thing expecting a different result was the definition of insanity, and the man fit it perfectly. Attacks rained down, the man brushed them off, and a resounding thud rocked the gate. Victor's mind had had enough. Couldn't take any more. Kill that fucker already. Chapter 339 Breach. Chris POV. Felt like I had been under attack for hours, even though it had only been a few minutes. I may have overestimated my ability to shrug off attacks. When I first approached the city, there weren't that many people I felt with aura detection. That gave me pause. There was one I assumed was the city leader, a barely contained fire that burnt away at my aura when it got close to the man. Another that felt bloody but not in a solely sinister way, and two more that were notable but I couldn't outright describe. They were hidden, and that was impressive in its own right. Not many could after I purchased aura detection. Other than those four, there weren't that many others that felt anywhere near threatening, which was odd. The natural curve of power levels felt wildly lopsided. Sure, the leader was at the top, and there was a small grouping that was up there with him, if a bit lower, but other than that, nothing remotely close in scale. Power levels in Frostheim were much more gradual. Sure, I still sat at the top, and if you excluded my family, the next strongest was Elliot, but the gap between him and Anders, his vice-captain, wasn't that far. Subsequently, the gap between Anders and his lieutenants wasn't that far either. Just in Elliot's order alone, there were 6 D ranks. That was not the case from what I felt from the city walls. After sensing that initially, I had assumed charging at them wouldn't have been that hard. My increased stats were outrageous: glacial heavy plate encased my body, and an underlayer of metal plate armor just in case the ice broke. A layer of rare grade enchanted armor and epic armor skill, and stats well above anything the defenders had. My assumption should have been sound, and it was, if it wasn't for the sheer number of attacks. Nearly every individual attack coming at me was one I could shrug off alone, but that didn't mean the collective might of all of them was the same. I blamed 2 people. Consistently, there were 2 attacks that kept breaking the outer layer of ice armor and that then let other attacks through. A powerful arrow with some type of armor-breaking skill tacked on, and a fire spell of some sort. I wasn't sure what spell it was exactly, but it was concentrated, powerful, and hot. It burned through the ice and melted large portions of it if I didn't reinforce it with my law or spirit. Even though attacks were getting through, I didn't stop. I wouldn't until the gate was down and an opening was made. That was my job. The attacks followed me after I ran back towards their range. Mana flowed through the skill structure and the plates of ice refroze back into pristine condition. The underlayer of metal was still holding up fine, other than a few kicks and scorch marks. After reaching a far enough distance, I turned back and sprinted back at the gate. Much like the first time I charged, the feet ate up the ground and I bounded toward my target. My speed was every so slightly faster. My stats didn't get any higher and my boosts were still maxed out, but my movement skill was not. Glacial March provided a slow but consistent speed increase. In the 5 charges, that amounted to little, but it was building. Attacks rained down, and I ignored all but the 2 most powerful. I positioned my hammer in front of the intense bolt of fire and attempted to dodge the arrow, but failed. If I allowed myself to diverge from my course, I could have done it, but I refused. The urge was stupid, and the idea behind it was even more stupid, but I couldn't help it. The piece inside of me that wanted to face whatever they could throw head-on and shrug it off. To steamroll everything in my way. To so utterly and completely show anyone who thought they could kill my people the consequences. To have them realize their mistake and know, without a shadow of a doubt, there was nothing they could do to stop what was coming for them. To stop me from reaching them. Maybe, deep down, there was another reason I didn't dodge, but I didn't want to think about it, so I didn't. The pain was easily ignored. The heat washed over me and tried to melt the ice while the arrow hit and shattered a small plate, but the rest were ignored. An opportunistic catapult tried to hit me but missed wildly. The gate loomed large once again, and I swung my hammer for the 6th time to the result of a resounding thud. People were shouting and orders were being issued on the wall above, but I ignored them. The wards flared brightly but otherwise held up to the force. The wood did the same. Again. I ran back and did it again. The attacks rained down, a few small injuries accrued, and I smashed the gate once again. Boom, boom, boom. Thrice more to the same effect for the 10th knock. My hammer strikes were matched by boulders raining down on the city in sequence. Our trebuchets had never stopped working, and even though the first volley had been thwarted, that didn't mean all of them were. Continued, sustained attacks, both by me and them, wore down their defenses, but not fast enough for my liking. Fine, so be it. I had wanted to hold at least one thing back to keep just in case, but my current actions were getting me nowhere. I was getting faster, but not nearly at the rate to make a large difference. My bloodline thrummed as I called on it to aid me. The frosty energy, amplified by my heart, filled my veins, and I felt my body drinking it up like water in a desert. The strain of maintaining my boosting skills immediately lessened, and my speed increased subtly. The bloodline of the frost giant wasn't meant for speed, but for overwhelming force through strength. It also increased my defense to match, but that part wasn't what I needed right now. My steps were longer, my line of sight raised by a few inches, and the ice surrounding me felt more comforting. Boom! The next swing of my hammer resulted in a much louder knock. The gate rattled threateningly, and the wards flickered and fractured. The force it dissipated was too much for it to do so without consequence. They held. For now. Boom! Boom! Two more saw them worse for wear. The mana drain had to be huge, but they paid it. The thought that it came from my own crystals angered me further, but I couldn't do anything about it. Every swing was harder than the last. Every time, I pushed my muscles as far as they would go and my hammer as fast as it could. Slowly, I was winning. The conclusion was inevitable. They just couldn't see it yet. The continued strain of my blows was burning through the formation. I could see it and feel it. The feedback from my hammer was enough to know it was faltering, but I could see the lines of mana burning into the wood and surrounding stone. Every hit worsened them further. I continued until I felt it was ready. They had softened enough. It was now I could feel it. The next trip back towards our camp, I stopped. My momentum momentarily halted. Glacial March fought me, threatening to deactivate because of the inaction, but I manhandled it into submission. It hurt somewhere in my spirit, but I ignored it. My pause was instantly noticed by both sides. All eyes were already on me, but I made to give the signal anyway. I had to force the ice out of the way, but I grabbed the horn on my waist and blew it. Honk! The same horn blast that had started it all would end it. It was the signal that this would be the last charge. As I pushed my feet forward once more, I didn't need to scream out in order to charge or say anything for that matter. The horn was enough. As I ran back toward the wall for what I could only guess to be the 20th time, an army followed after me. I didn't look back, but I had no trouble picturing what I would see. The entirety of the Order of the Bear would be at my back. Elliot, encased in thick metal, leading the charge with shield and sword aloft. With him would be John, clad in stone. Anders, clad in thick pelts and great axe in hand. Hugo with a warhammer of his own. Valerie with a great sword as tall as she was. The rest of the order charged fearlessly in my footsteps. Behind them would be the Order of the Wolf, mixed in with mages from an as-of-yet unformed order. Glacial March stopped fighting me and helped me bound forward one last time. The attacks that had once been so concentrated fanned out. The catapults that had been as yet unused launched their fiery payloads. Fiery because they were literally set on fire. A new addition. I was too far ahead to be targeted by them and kept my line on the gate. The same powerful arrow and fire spell tried to stop me, but just like the last dozen times, it left light wounds only. A few steps away, I did something different. Mana and energy flowed out of me and into my hammer, which then began to shift. The once contiguous head broke apart and cracked. The runes along the shaft lit up, and I could feel the violent energies raging to be unleashed, and I had just the target. Shattering hammer would have its outlet to vent its violence. The gate reached me and I swung with all I could give. Instead of just being powered by sheer force and power of will, my hammer now held an energy ready to shatter and sunder, to tear apart and rend into pieces. My spirit and law flowed in to aid it, feeding the violence, stoking it to new heights. It was most likely the single most powerful attack I had ever dealt out, and it was on a door. An irony I would have to appreciate later, as the room to focus on it now wasn't in me. My hammer met wood, and there was no resounding boom, no thunder nor thud, but a sharp, intense crack. like lightning had flashed down and the thunder was left behind. The sound of glass shattering filled that air, and it wasn't glass, but the formation that was the source of the sound. The already burned conduits were assaulted by the empowered violent energy and couldn't handle it. My hammer continued, its violent energy substantially expended, but its force and speed still grand, and hit the wood straight on. There were protections on it. I could feel as much enchantments of protection or durability. A law of wood empowered it, and the wood itself was strong, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The wood was next to shatter, and a spray of splinters shot into the city. I had forced open an opening, and now it was time to capitalize on it. Through the hole, I could see frightened faces and trembling weapons, but that didn't stop me. My next swing spilled blood instead of splintering wood, and the next one after that did the same. I left permafrost and desolate blizzard alone. Not only was I approaching my limit for active skills, but I didn't want to hinder my allies. The main purpose of those skills was to create an environment in my favor, and it was already winter. There was no better environment. Swords clattered against ice and failed to cut through. Axes and halberds fared little better. Hammers and maces tried to crack it and had the most effect and could be called somewhat effective, if those cracks didn't refreeze in moments and wash away what little damage there had been. After the first few men and women who held the line against my assault died instantly, the onset of fear was palpable. I could see it in their eyes and feel it in their actions. The confident swings were gone and even their own feet fought against them. They wanted to be anywhere but in my path, but it wasn't to be so. They were there and then they weren't, but not in the way they were praying for. Blood quickly coated my hammer, and the splatter quickly found its way on me as well. I swore if the total time of Frostbound and now glacial heavyplate being active was added up, that the time it had spent tinted red from blood outdid the time it was icy blue. My steps into their ranks and the city were relatively unhindered, and I felt Elliot and John smash through behind me. The gap I had shattered open was being filled, so I pushed further. I didn't need any weapon skills to dispatch the chaff thrown against me, and I saved on the mana. I had already expended a decent amount before getting into the city, and I still had a bastard leader to fight, wherever he was. Anders came roaring in the gate, axe already swinging. Hugo and Valerie behind him. The gap was quickly filling, and we would soon run out of room. There were hundreds of bodies trying to stop our advance, and as fast as we were culling them, more stepped up. If our advance slowed, we would end up clumped up and primed for a counterattack. Let's see how this does in action. I had practiced and played with the skill before, but this would be the first time I would be using it for its intended purpose. I didn't force it into phantom hammers, but I also didn't let the skill waste it by diluting it too much. I didn't need to hit behind me. I only needed to hit in front and around me. For good measure, I threw Meteor Strike on it to give it a little extra. The mana cost was hefty, but I paid it. Both skills layered on my hammer, and as it came screaming down, I took hold of hammer reverberation and forced the energy to go in one direction. Outward in front of me, all my strength with Meteor Strike was a lot of force to control, but I wrapped my spirit around it like a stranglehold and forced it to do what I wanted. My hammer landed on the next foe in line, but it did much more than that. So much more. Outward from where my hammer hit metal armor, a shockwave of force so great it was visible rippled out. A flutter of snow followed in its wake, both from the snow already on the ground getting affected and the skill manifesting it. The force shockwave and snow rippled out, and body after body exploded like... I cut that gruesome thought off. Nasty. It was nasty. My fear of just my outlandish strength not being enough was unfounded. Meteor Strike was complete and utter overkill. The gap was much wider now and my objective was accomplished. But my stomach wasn't ready to do it again. Death was death. It didn't much matter how, being as instant as it was, but the image, I knew I wouldn't like what was to come. But that was a bit much even for me. Thankfully, one was enough to create a breach big enough that I didn't see it being necessary to do so again. I hoped not, at least. Seeing that my main job was done, I felt around for my next task. Slaughtering the weaklings could be left to others. I sought the real prize. I felt it, up on the walls flinging spells down. A fire bright and shining to aura detection. My next target was set. Now all I needed to do was get there. Chapter 340 Rift and Fear. Victor POV. How was it possible for things to go so poorly? To have everything turn on its head and do the opposite of expectation? How the fuck was it possible for one man to break down the gates like he was hitting a particularly sturdy piñata? This is before he evolved? Hell, what would have happened after? He shrugged off, flame spear after flame spear, like it was nothing, and that was with Victor's law empowering it. All the spell did was melt his armor for a brief period. Brief. It wasn't the strongest spell Victor could throw around. But still, then, after shattering the gate into pieces, he misted over 24 people in one swing. Disappeared them. Erased them from existence like they were only flesh balloons in need of popping. A great many things were running through Victor's mind, and for the first time in a long, long while, there was fear. He'd planned, he'd trained, he'd prepared, but watching the man swing his hammer in one destructive arc after another, it didn't seem like enough. Victor didn't want to face the man. He wanted to run. Quentin, stop him. Ren issued the order because Victor was too busy trying to figure out where it went all wrong. They planned and assumed they would scale the walls, not bust through them, so Quentin and most of their strongest warriors were not even remotely in position. It was the weaker ones who were placed to hold the gate, just in case. The berserker was nowhere near the fighting, waiting for enemies to come over the wall that would never come. Luckily, while Quentin may have been a musclehead, he knew battle. He knew how to evaluate his opponent and knew that nothing short of his best would be enough against the Baron. With a mighty roar, Quentin's aura exploded in a vitalic red as any and every berserk skill the man had was activated one after another. With blood quickly being shed around him in great quantities, the man was well on his way to his peak. Victor could feel the man straining to contain everything. He even activated his bloodline, which sent his veins protruding and his eyes bloodshot as the energy of the blood-fur tiger raged through him. It was the most powerful Victor had ever seen him. He'd seen him regenerate from certain death multiple times from a level lower than where he currently was. Quentin should hold him. He's got an epic class and skills to match. Victor's confidence in Quentin's victory should have been high. They had the numbers and the advantage. Along with Quentin, Victor should have been assured. He wasn't. Instead of staying to help, he ran. He could feel the promise of death clearly in the air. A chill that tickled his neck and whispered of his demise if he stayed. It was looking for him, and Victor needed to make sure he wasn't found. I can build a new city. Hell, I don't even need a city. I only did it to conscript cheap labor and resources. Fuck all that, I need to survive. Victor watched Quentin launch himself off the wall and into the skirmish. He could see Ren firing arrow after arrow, and he could feel Des sneaking around looking for the perfect opportunity. Even Olivia was commanding a significant amount of mana, dueling a water mage outside the wall he couldn't see. It had to be a powerful one because Olivia was losing. He saw all of it, people he had grown to know over the years, and he turned his back and ran. If I can go south far enough, I should be safe. Chris POV. I waded through the bodies trying to reach the stairs to the wall. I could feel the fire I was after up there, and I was determined to get there. Cutting down the people in my way was quick, but not quick enough. Especially with the annoying-ass archer taking pot shots at me the entire time. I assumed he had given up, but I was wrong. His arrows came flying in nearly by the second. Right before I reached the stairs leading up to the battlements, a roar drew my attention. It, and the aura accompanying it, were coming at me quickly. A blood red filled the air in a weak haze around a tall, well-built man covered in a crimson pelt on top of the wall. He gripped twin axes in either hand, and with no warning, he threw himself off the wall and directly at me. It was one of the most insane things I had seen so far, as the man leaped and turned himself into a human missile. Both axes led the way as a dripping red coated both blades in a skill of some kind. The metallic scent of freshly spilled blood followed the man as he descended, and I could tell the man was strong. D-rank easily and was currently running an impressive amount of boosting skills. A berserker if I had to guess. A berserker with a blood affinity, I thought. His vitality and healing will be off the charts. My assessment was quick, and I knew what I needed to do. To take out the healing factor altogether, I needed to end it in one swing. I didn't want to get stuck whacking a man who just kept healing. Since the man so willingly obliged by launching himself at me, it would be remiss of me if I didn't take advantage of the situation. Frozen Leech would help in a sustained fight, but I didn't plan on this taking long. I still had a fire to put out. My hammer creaked and changed in a record time as I poured mana into it once more for Shattering Hammer. It was my most powerful single-target skill, and I aimed to end it in one swing. I threw my spirit and law into the skill to overclock it once more and brought my hammer around in a terrifying, two-handed downward swing. The berserker's eyes tracked my weapon fearfully once it was filled with the energy of my skill, and he raised both axes to block it. By launching himself in front of me, he barely had any time to set his feet to receive my swing. Not that it would have helped him. My hammer crashed down on his axes and blew through his guard. It wasn't like the weaklings earlier, but while the man was strong, he wasn't strong enough. His guard was broken, and his own axes were slammed down into his face. He didn't have to think about his weapons hitting him long, as my hammer followed soon after. His head exploded in like the bodies from earlier. Surprisingly, the kill notification didn't come immediately, and the essence didn't transfer. The blood aura was still there, and I could see the energy rushing towards the wound desperately. Blood gushed everywhere, some of it shooting over 10 feet in the air, as the man became a geyser of it. Scratch that insane vitality. I amended. The man was actually healing from an exploded head. I wasn't sure if it would actually work and the man would come back, but that option was cut short as Shattering Hammer demanded its due. There was still something else carried by my hammer other than force. Knowing the man most likely relied on blood for power and enhanced healing, I directed the violent energy to sunder something specific. I could have let the skill do its thing, but I aimed to sunder his arteries and veins instead of just shattering his body. I wanted to target his base of power and break it so thoroughly that there wasn't a chance of recovery. Shattering Hammer didn't disappoint. There were spots that my control failed and cracks spread along his skin, but for the most part it followed my guidance, and from the head down, blood vessel after blood vessel burst and exploded. Arteries blew open like an overinflated tire, and veins were ripped apart viciously. A new round of blood geysered out of the headless man. What little energy and power he had remaining that kept him upright failed, and he toppled over listlessly. Blood pooled everywhere. Red dyed the area in a gruesome painting of lost life. The chime was heard, and the essence was transferred. There was no coming back from that. The stench pooled in my nose, and I struggled to push the bile back down, but I managed. Something much more important was happening, and I couldn't afford to stay held up on a dead man. The fire was running. It was getting further away from me, and I had to strain aura detection to keep track of it. The fire was traveling deeper into the city, closer to the center, while I remained at the northern edge, just inside the wall. My mind briefly flashed with the thought of running through the city and the deaths that it might cause, but I pushed it away. I could only hope it didn't come to that, but that man needed to die. Hal had said there was something off about the city, and while I couldn't feel it, he had been adamant. Especially now, with this being the second time he was here. Even if that wasn't the case, I wasn't going to let the man go. I had set out to bring the man to justice, and I wasn't going to fail now. The stairs leading up to the wall were forgotten as I bounded away instead. Shields and weapons were raised to stop me, but I blew through them. The annoying arrows had stopped, and none were shot into my back. Luckily, not that it would have stopped me. Bodies were violently thrown away in my wake, but I bounded on, tracking the fleeing flame. It had stopped in the center of the city for some reason, and I wasn't going to let the chance to catch up get away. My feet quickly carried me to a building. It was at the direct center of the city, and I could feel the mana being sucked into the dungeon below. The building was remarkably well-built and looked every bit as ostentatious as I expected. Compared to the buildings bordering the wall, the one I was looking at was night and day different. Its grandeur didn't stop me from blasting the door into oblivion as I rushed in and up the stairs. Floor after floor whizzed by as I took the stairs as quickly as I could without breaking them. Some were shattered by the force, but they were left mainly intact. Mostly intact. As somewhat intact, I wasn't exactly ginger. As I climbed the building, I felt the fire dashing back and forth on the top floor, and so when I finally broke through the door and set foot into the room, it didn't surprise me that a slimy-looking man was throwing everything he could into a sack. Finally face to face with the man, I couldn't help but be disappointed. He looked like an average asshole. Brown hair that was messy from the fighting and a pale complexion with swaths of red. Burn marks? Couldn't tell. He wore leather armor, and a staff was tightly clutched in the nook of his arm, topped with what looked like an expensive beast core. Mage. Fire by the looks of it. Burn marks and a propensity for red. If the powerful fire spells from before weren't enough, the details I picked up in the split second after entering were. Copper and silver coins were spilled over the table while he tried to sweep them up into the sack that already held gems and crystals. There were other valuables around the room, but I didn't spend any time on them. I only had eyes for one thing in the room, and it wasn't something shiny. Running. Speaking wasn't something I had planned. I usually didn't lecture or monologue. It was pointless to talk to someone you planned to kill, but I couldn't help it. Seeing the person I was aiming to kill stuffing a bag and planning to run was too much. It was a disgrace. Honorless. Despicable. The man's eyes shot to me as soon as I entered, and I could see the fear in them. He was nearly shaking, but he gathered himself commendably, if it weren't for what I had caught him in the middle of doing. No, 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 he shouted animatedly. This wasn't the deal. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not yet. Couldn't help it. I expected a fight, and this was going somewhere completely different. What? Shut up, he screamed, and it didn't feel like he was talking to me, but there was no one else in the room. Get out of my head. This man's batshit. Not willing to waste any more time entertaining. Whatever this was, I stepped into the room and ready to fight. Like a switch was flipped, the man's entire demeanor changed. The sack was dropped and forgotten as his face morphed into something dark. Fine. I hadn't planned on going through with this, but you asked for it. He turned to the valuables he'd been gathering a moment before. Shame, but nothing can be done. I wasn't willing to let this go on any further and ran toward him and readied my hammer, but I never got the chance. In a sudden instant, the entire room burst into flames. A fire washed out from the man and quickly set everything alight. The heat exploded the windows and hit me like a physical attack. My ice was enough to stop it from reaching me, but it was quickly starting to melt. My law snaked out and soaked into the plates, but even that only gave it extra time before melting. Tier 2 fire law. That much was obvious, but it was the concepts involved that startled me. Rachel's law was also Tier 2, but this was completely different. It was so much more violent and with hints of insidiousness. It felt sinister if a fire could feel as such. Ha ha ha! The man cackled like a crazy person, and he was bathed in flames that ignored him but ravaged the room. I charged through the flames and swung my hammer, but instead of an impact, it hit nothing but air. In a flash of fire, the man disappeared and reappeared in the other corner of the room. Great, I growled. Rachel had a similar skill, and it was the most annoying thing to fight against. Even Austin's speed wasn't as bad. Wear him down. The more successive uses, the harder it gets. I threw mana into Frozen Leech and felt the link between us snap into place. The link wavered, and I could feel the flames affecting it, but I pushed more power into it to keep it steady. I wasn't planning on this taking long, but every little bit helped. The entire building wasn't helping. It was quickly filling up with fire mana and heat. Both were bad for me and looked to be good for him. I wasn't certain how his skill worked, but standing in a room on fire was sure to help him. I tried a few more times to reach him with the same result. He just kept dancing around the room with ease. His hands flung fire in all forms. A bolt, a lance, a spear. Any shape he could form was gathered and thrown as he peppered me with attacks. Leech was slowly sapping his mana, but it wasn't fast enough. Not nearly fast enough. Glacial heavy plate was quickly melting, and my law wasn't enough to save it. Even my spirit coursing through it wasn't enough. The room was superheated, and the continuous fire attacks were too much. The only ice not melting was my hammer. Fuck this. If he wanted to dance around me and sling fire, I would take away his advantage. Shattering hammer activated for the third time, and I slammed my hammer down onto the floor. The force alone was enough to blast it to pieces, but the skill followed along the floor and into the walls. It arced down them and into the floors below, and in one swing the entire top 2 floors were blown apart like a bomb had gone off. The floor dropped out from under me, but it also dropped out from under him. The flames followed after the mage as he directed them downward, against their nature. The floor below us was weakened, and the weight from 2 floors crashing down on it blew it open, and we fell again. I swung again and again until I felt the building start to teeter. It was going to collapse. Icy bastion flared around me and bared the brunt of it by erecting a dome of ice around me. I could have done without the skill, but I didn't want to end up buried in debris. The entire building dropped down on our heads, and I waited out the aftermath under a dome of ice. The heat threatened to melt it, but I pushed enough into it to keep it from doing so. The mage was preoccupied with not getting buried and was too busy to be throwing spells at me. After the dust settled, I exploded out of the rubble just in time to see the mage do the same. An intense heat burnt to ash anything around him, and he was free once more, looking little worse off. At least the fire is gone. Back out in the open, winter winds whipped around us, and a snowstorm was just beginning to unleash flakes of snow down upon us. The link to frozen leech was easier to maintain, and the air was breathable rather than superheated. I grinned. You think you won? You think that destroying the building was enough? The mage yelled and raised his staff. Mana gathered too quickly to stop, and fire spewed once more. It licked the rubble and set the wood alight once more, but that wasn't all. It shot out to surrounding buildings and set them alight as well. Building after building was hit by the fire and lit up like torches in the night. He's burning his own city, and that wasn't even the worst part. Screams were coming from the buildings on fire. There were people in them and they were going to die. In that moment I made a split-second decision. It was stupid and it probably wouldn't work, but it was all I could think of so quickly. I grasped my hammer in both hands firmly and prayed it would work. Mana roared in my veins. All the mana I could control and gather on quick notice was rushing to my hammer for one attack. One skill. The icy head lit up in a dance of light. Blues, greens, purples. There was more mana channeling through it than ever before, and an aurora bloomed from inside of it, but I didn't pay it any heed. My focus was entirely on the mana and forcing as much of it as I could into it. My heart was already beating fast. Adrenaline from the battle and the exertion it had brought was forcing it to beat at an unhealthy tempo, but it helped push mana through me. My head split, but I forced my body to work, to swing my hammer upward. My hammer, full of mana, aurora radiantly shining, and determination fueled, hit the air and stopped. The air rippled, and the runes along the shaft flared brightly. A rift bigger than anything I had ever created or seen broke the air. Even the portal the demons were making couldn't compare. And on the other side was a land of desolation. Ice and snow drowned the landscape and blew in violent winds. Winds that now had an outlet. Through the portal came a wind so cold and screaming that it caused goosebumps along my skin and fear to blossom in me. What came next was an avalanche of ice and snow that spilled out in amounts hard to imagine. Frozen Rift was my own skill, but I hadn't thought it was capable of this. End of chapter 340.